Welcome to
Good morning.
today's webinar entitled Equitable and Proactive Utility Engagement for Electric School Bus Development. My name is Billy Zadig, Manager, Special Programs for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA website later this week. Please visit our website at www.apa.org to register for upcoming events and to view archived webinars for continuing education credits found under the Continuous Learning tab. APA-U is back live in person and coming to Providence, Rhode Island in September and Fort Worth, Texas in January of 2023. Information is available on the APA website under the CLS tab. Professional continuing education certificates are being offered for today's program. AIA members who need their attendance reported to AIA should contact me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, at APA.org. Those who indicated they wanted a certificate at registration and meet the requirements will receive certificates later this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by our presenter. If you're just calling in, make sure to send me an email at billie@apa.org so I can send you a certificate if you would like one. The system only recognizes you if you log in. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Greg Kresge. Greg, take it away.
Thanks, Billy, and good morning, everybody. So this is about equitable and proactive utility engagement for electric school bus deployment. And why this is important to you is because for these new electric school bus deployments, the school district plays the primary role in this, and the educational facility plays a primary role in these rollouts. Because without you, we wouldn't have school buses. So, and then in addition to that, there's a lot of other players in this space and a lot of other people that are part of this potential deployment. And so with that, I'm going to get started on this particular aspect, which is this proactive utility engagement, which is around basically trying to get the school buses deployed in those communities that are the most affected by diesel emissions from regular internal combustion engine school buses. So the learning objectives for this, we have 5 key focus areas in the electric school bus initiative. So I'm from WRI, and I actually come to WRI with having worked 16 years in the utilities, 12 of them in electric utilities. I've worked in renewable energy and electric transportation. In addition to managing the power generation on the grid, I happen to live in Hawaii, so I know there's not a lot of sympathy for that, but we have a very interesting environment because we have a tremendous amount of renewable energy, but we also are all separate grids. A lot of people don't realize that none of the Hawaiian Islands are tied to each other in any way, so they each have to operate separately, and they don't get to pull electricity from anybody else. So what you generate on the island is what you have, and if you fall short, then you don't have enough electricity to service your customers. But if you have excess, then you have to mitigate that as well. So within WRI, we have which is the World Resources Institute and specifically the Electric School Bus Initiative. We have these 5 key focus areas. We're going to be going over those. We also help with the EPA Clean School Bus Program, which just received a tremendous amount of funding, $2.5 billion with a B, under the IIJA funding, and that is going to be rolled out over 5 years. So actually, this first tranche of funding that was able to be applied for was due August 19th, which was last Friday. That will be releasing up to $500 million in that first round of funding, and then followed by several other funding periods. We also want to point to you the power planner that we put together, which is if you're looking at electrifying your fleet, this doesn't only apply to school buses. It applies to any electric vehicles in your fleet. And this is around engaging with your utility, things to look for, things that you should come into the meetings with to discuss with your utility and with your facility managers and everybody else who might be involved in this space from the educational facility perspective, what you should be considering when you're looking at electrifying your fleet. And those could be also light duty vehicles too. So not just these medium and heavy duty vehicles of buses. And if you have other vehicles like trucks and that sort of thing in your fleet that might not qualify as like a light duty or a regular vehicle. And then looking at those proactive utility engagements. We are reaching out to utilities across the nation to try to have utilities jump into this space. A lot of the utilities have requirements to engage equitably, and actually their funding mechanisms have a certain percentage of funding that they must spend on underserved or underprivileged communities that meet certain criteria. Again, I said I'm the senior manager for utility engagement and transportation electrification at WRI and the Electric School Bus Initiative. So why do we want to electrify the U.S. school bus fleet? And these are the main reasons. There's improved health. There's the kids on the bus and the driver are exposed to 10 times the number of emissions inside the bus than they are on the outside of the bus. And then in addition, if you were one of those children that rode a school bus to school or from school back home, that the buses, the diesel buses will, to continue operating. A lot of times they sit there idling, waiting for kids to come in the doors. Not all the kids come at once. They can send a lot of pollutants into the air while they're idling for, sometimes up to half an hour in one location. Cleaner air, there's a lot of pollution emissions from diesel using vehicles. Reduced operating expenses for school districts. And this comes in the form of two things specifically. One is that electric vehicles have less moving parts. They don't have as many liquids and other things that need to be changed out. So they have less maintenance that goes along with them. And because of those, less moving parts, and instead of an engine, you're using a motor, an electric-driven motor, and the fuel is not in a tank; it's actually in batteries. Which are much more self-contained and again take a lot less work than other mechanical moving parts. There's new jobs in green manufacturing. There's going to be, you've seen probably across the nation that there's a lot of new investment in electric vehicles across the board. There's new manufacturing plants and then in addition, everything that goes with that, which is the whole supply chain that goes from batteries to the vehicles, to chargers, to even EV technicians. So when you move from a mechanical environment into an electrical environment, those mechanics, then if they train to be able to work on EVs, then they become EV technicians. And then we're looking at trying to get to a tipping point for this medium and heavy duty electrification, especially with school buses, which is from which point every procurement, every purchase of a school bus from that point forward becomes an electric school bus. We're trying to reach that by 2025. It's a really huge goal and very aggressive, but we are reaching out across the nation, and there's a lot of things that are helping move that forward. And then in addition, there's this big part down here, which is the enhanced resiliency and renewables integration with B2G. So that sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of potential with this, which is there is energy that is stored in these batteries, and they happen to be on wheels, and they can be moved around. So the idea is that if this energy can be stored in these batteries can be used in times where there might not be grid power, especially if there's disasters or emergency response activities, where there's energy that's needed at a shelter or a specific location. That could be tents in a parking lot, that could be a community center, hospital, it could be fire department, police department. These buses, if they're set up correctly, they can discharge their energy and be able to be used instead of diesel generators. They can be used as emergency mobile generators. And then if you are further able to tie that to, say, an electric solar panel array, there's a possibility that those panels can then refuel the bus, even though there's no grid power. So I mentioned that there's 5 focus areas within our electric school bus initiative. And our funding is meant to be used for these 5 particular areas. And as you see on the top and the bottom, the 2 gray bars, those are our overarching equitable interactions and engagement. So we are trying to first move these school buses into areas and along with the Clean School Bus funding program funding that just is being administered by EPA. This first round of funding was for priority school districts that met certain equitable criteria, and it could be that they are in disadvantaged communities that are lower income. They could have that are racially diverse or BIPOC communities. And they have to meet several criteria. We are trying to make sure that these school buses go in those areas first, but not last. So the thing is that we are trying to do everything at once. We realize that these school districts, these areas, oftentimes are short on resources, and they don't have the resources to necessarily convert their fleet. They're just, they tend to be poor. They tend to not have as many resources as in some other school districts and areas. So first of what we do is, you see on the left-hand side, we have a focus area around school districts, and what that does is provides technical assistance to school districts and to school boards and that sort of thing. And this is around, what does an electric fleet look like? How would they even go about getting electric school bus? And what are the considerations that they need? And what are the tools or resources that might most benefit or be able to help them through that process? The second focus area, we call them pillars. The second focus area is around manufacturers. So this is mostly around the school bus manufacturers and the battery manufacturers. So school buses are not necessarily a one company vehicle. They oftentimes will have a different drivetrain from a different body and a different battery supplier. So you can have potentially 3 or 4 different companies, entities coming together. You might even have a different one that actually does the onboard electrical software and hardware. And then, so that's around the manufacturer side. We actually have a steering committee. We engage the manufacturers all together to try to advance the electric school buses across the board. And then my area where I sit is in the utility area, and that's quite a big area. We cover funding and financing to try to close the gap between the electric school bus and a diesel school bus. This gap is quite large right now. The electric school buses can be up to 3 times the cost of a normal diesel school bus. That, in addition, so our funding that we've received to do this effort that cannot be used for the school buses or for hardware like chargers. We are specifically able to provide technical assistance, engagement, facilitation, and tools and resources. So in the utility area, we look at we look at all the different funding mechanisms and the total cost of ownership and the business model. So we find that about 40% of the school districts across the nation engage in a contract for with a transportation provider. So that may mean that, and that has a whole bunch of different variants to it. That basically that is where the transportation provider may come in and provide all of the services. They may provide the bus, they may provide the driver, they may provide the land or the site for the bus, or they may only provide one of those things. So we look at all of those contracts, and then 60% are in areas where school districts actually own, operate, maintain the buses on their own. So we look at all of these funding mechanisms to see where there might be stackable opportunities, and then also looking at that total cost of ownership and being able to kind of map that out over years to find out, where is that break-even point? If you're spending more for the bus, but you're spending less on fuel because you're buying electricity now instead of gas, which is very volatile, and everybody knows that, or diesel. Everybody knows that from having felt that in their own pockets, buying gas for your car, but in addition to diesel fuel has really increased in price as well. Basically, you have a much more stable environment in the pricing with electric, because electric utilities are regulated for the most part. They have a board or commission that they have to report to, and they can only set their rates. They have a very predefined or determined rate structure. So if the price of gas jumps dramatically, the price of your kilowatt hour, which is the packet of energy that you buy, doesn't necessarily increase to that same extent. It actually has a much more flat, flat sort of pricing structure to it, which makes it much more stable and predictable. So in addition to that funding and financing, we also engage with the utilities, and we try to hold both the school district and the utilities hands in these communications together. And sometimes we do site assessments, and we look at the sites, and we actually engage in those conversations between school districts and the utility, so that we're all speaking the same language, so that coming from a utility and knowing the service request requirements and transformer upgrades and all these things that school districts probably don't have great knowledge or vocabulary around. It's making sure that that gets transferred across correctly, and that we're even doing some short videos of where does the electrical power come into your utility, into your site. What does that look like? What is a meter? What is an electrical meter? A lot of people don't necessarily know, other than a device that's on the wall. They may not know what else that device does. And now we're getting into an environment where electrical meters are much more complex. And then in addition, looking at panels and breakers, circuit breakers and disconnects and things like those that are required in these new installations for chargers that will be servicing electric school buses. And then also looking about what that looks like on your school bus. Where's the charging port? How are you going to park? What's going to be the best way to get that charger connected to your bus? And then also on the utility side, I mentioned the disaster and resiliency side. So we are working on vehicle to grid and what we call vehicle to everything, which is, it doesn't necessarily have to be energy that would be sent back to the electric utility. It could be used for that site. It could be used for a shelter environment. As long as you have the correct charger and you have the correct, and the bus that is capable of discharging that energy, that's a great setup for the school. In some cases, you can move energy, what we call energy arbitrage, which is you can charge at a cheaper period during the day or in the evening and avoid an evening peak that might be more expensive energy. So you want to take advantage of being able to charge in a managed charging way where you can plug in the bus, your drivers go home, your facility managers and operators go home, and that bus will charge on a schedule. and also try to make it as cheap as possible. So that's one of those things that we recommend across the board. We don't recommend non-managed charging specifically for that purpose. And then, if there's a disaster response or a disaster of some type, and the school, and this is where the schools are perfect for this, as well as the buses that have very predictable routes and schedules. The buses could be used as assets to help power a facility, and oftentimes school can be made into a shelter where we would be looking at powering parts of that facility, not the entire thing. And then we also have this pillar 4, which is around federal and state policymakers and working with counties and cities, and then engaging with local communities and reaching out to especially disadvantaged communities, and making sure that the communities are involved in the decision making around their electric school bus deployment. So this is our team on the utility side. So we have a team of about 60 people that work across the board in all of the focus areas. My team in particular is this team that you see before you. So we do a lot of research, we do a lot of outreach, and a lot of webinars like this, a lot of educational opportunities. So we have an equity framework that looks at, trying to roll out these equity efforts to make sure that the school buses are being deployed in these areas that need them, or that might be under-resourced. So we're looking at, I've covered all these things before, but there's some really exciting things that are happening in the equity space where there are some examples where utilities might be, if you're in one of those priority outreach districts where your district or your facility is in what is noted as a equity district, these and you happen to be in a utility territory that does do this proactive outreach, you might get a call from them. And this is, looking at all the people that are in your organization, so that the people who they talk with are the right people who should be involved in the decisions. And we honestly think that is really heavily on the transportation manager side and the bus operator side. You may have an administration department that already has a link with the utility, but if they don't have a discussion with you around the buses, the actual buses and the requirements at the facility, there's going to be a disconnect there, and it's going to end up costing more in time and money than it might otherwise need to be. So I mentioned the Clean School Bus Program funding. I don't know how many of you have actually participated in this yet, but this is going to become a bigger and bigger opportunity. The first round of funding was this $500 million that was for applications that were received by August 19th. I'm going to point out a couple main things here. This is free money. The great thing about this program is that this program will fund the entire bus, and it will fund it not on a reimbursement basis. It will fund it based on a purchase agreement or a purchase order. That means that if you don't have to put money out of your pocket. This is one of the first programs that does this, where it's not a reimbursement or a rebate. It is actually funding the upfront costs. And that's huge, because if you don't have to budget for these buses and make up that price difference between the electric school bus and the diesel school bus, and you can get that bus funded and to some extent the charging infrastructure funded as well, that is a huge, that's a huge opportunity to be able to move forward with these buses. So we have some more resources. We have a whole website that is dedicated to this. We are looking at being heavily engaged. And what I can tell you is that this first round for August 19th, it was applied, which is great. We don't want any of this money sitting on the table at the end of the day. They did, EPA's first priority was to get at least one application from each state. I heard that they might have met that goal. I think that they got at least 49 states from my understanding. And so that's great. There's going to be this big rollout across the board. Before, we had patches of school districts that had electric school buses, and those tended to be located, not surprisingly, in and around California, New York, and Florida. So these slides will be made available later. These resources are here, but you can always go to wri.org and type in Clean School Bus Program or the Electric School Bus Initiative. So now I'm going to move on to how utilities can help underserved communities, and then also where you might play a role in that. So that's engaging these stakeholders, and I would consider, facility and transportation managers to be stakeholders in this process. So, engaging those stakeholders where you live, where you work, where the depots are located, finding out what's most important. If your school district is under-resourced and your biggest concern is to get, in a lot of cases, it's getting kids a couple meals a day that they might not get at home. That is super important to know. That's really important to know that, electric school buses might not be at the top of their priority list. So what is their priority, and how can we most help them? And what are the roles that the utilities can step in and provide for them? So for example, utilities have engineers and planners on staff. They have government engagement people. They have communications people that are already in their staff. This is not stepping outside of their already operation zone. This would be maybe having them step in and provide some of those resources that they might otherwise do, but not wait for an application, a service application, or an application by a school district to come in and provide a heavier service. Maybe they can reach out and do a site visit and engage with the transportation managers. Oftentimes, utilities will engage through a key account manager or a commercial account manager, and that person only engages with the admin office, the people who pay the bills. As a transportation manager at a site, you're going to have a really important role to play in this, because it's going to be your site that is now going to need to provide that electric fueling for these buses. And along with that comes that interaction with the utility, where you might have to increase your service and get more energy to your site. And like I said, that we're going to go through this a little bit, but there's a lot of things that go into that. It's not just a simple call up your utility and have them turn on some extra power. So you might actually have to install new service with a new meter. There might be different rates and that sort of thing that would greatly affect your bottom line. And, being a partner in this electric school bus deployment, bottom line is utilities are going to have a new load. They're going to have a new use of big use of electricity that they would otherwise supply. And that's going to be around electric vehicles. So these vehicles are going to be coming off of gasoline sources, and they're going to be coming onto the grid as additional consumers. So if you can plan for that and make that happen in the right way, then being a partner in that and doing that proactively is going to be to the benefit of everybody, including the utility, especially if they're an investor-owned utility that has owners, or stock owners, or individually owned. And then find out locations where this is another thing is, there's a lot of places where infrastructure might already exist, meaning that there's extra capacity or extra ability on the grid to be able to put in these new, charging infrastructure and chargers that might not be at the existing facility. So where can it be done? Where it could be done quickly, and how can the utility play a role in connecting those two together? So I mentioned that we have this power planner for electric school bus deployment. So this is a tool. And it leads you step by step. We go through 9 key steps. The main thing is that there needs to be coordinated communication with the schools and the electric utility in order for this to be successful. Otherwise, there tends to be a lot of delays and a lot of unnecessary costs and a lot of rework. We don't want a lot of rework when it comes to planning out these electric fleets. So the 9 key steps are listed here. So I'm going to go through a couple of them in detail. So why it matters. You want to know what that future fleet is going to look like. And there's a lot of tools in this power planner. There are links, and also on our website, there are links to tools. So you can get some free resources right up front. This is nothing you have to pay for. You can start planning your fleet. You can put in, what you think your fleet might look like into the future. Sorry. That we look at, don't chew off more than you need to. Look at like a 5-year planning period. Don't look at necessarily a 10-year planning period. Part of the reason why I say that is because charging infrastructure and chargers today, and even buses today, look very, very different than they did even just a couple years ago. So the technology is changing rapidly. It's going to continue to improve. There's going to continue to be more competition and more resources. And in that environment, you don't want to necessarily put all your eggs in that first basket. If those eggs might change color. You might have more opportunities, more choices in the future. So you want to dip in enough that is going to meet your needs into the near future, and then in a longer range vision, you can start to plan for that transition and determine your intended pace. Are you going to get a couple buses at first? Are you going to get 1 bus? Is that going to change to 3 buses in the next year? Or did you apply for the Clean School Bus Program funding that allowed you to apply for up to 25 buses? Are your buses all at one facility at a central depot, or are they housed at the schools? How many different charging locations will you need? And what does that look like? And what are the different implications and things you need to consider when you're looking at those locations? And look at your project priorities. Does your school district, does your school, does your facility, do your, if you're in a public school environment, does your supervisor or your school board, do they have sustainability goals? There's a lot of school districts now that are taking on renewable energy, and they have sustainable goals. These might fit right into those existing priorities and goals, and it might get a lot more support if you find out what those priorities and those goals are, especially if they fit into that project or priority in the future. This is number 4 is crucial, identifying the key contacts at your utility. So that is looking at, who in the utility are you already working with? Who's your key account manager, and who is that person in particular? It tends to be one person, and that person can be really important when it comes to these electrifying these school buses and getting new service and things like that, because you do want to get a baseline. And I'm going to go down this 5 and 6 area, communicating with your electric utility, finding out, what sorts of things, what is their application process? Do they have any contractors that they would recommend that you engage with to help you in this, be able to improve your electrical service at your site? Understanding your electric utility rates. What is the rate that you're currently on? What's your historical use? How is that looking to increase in the future? And because your utility bill is going to increase when you add electric school buses. But when you start comparing that to your diesel fuel costs, that's important to know and keep track of. And understanding, construction installation requirements. What does it mean? Are you going to tear up your parking lot? Can you dip in your toe right now with a few chargers that you can put on the outside of a wall with an existing service that you already have in your existing electrical panel, and give you the ability to start using existing chargers, without having to make huge changes to your facility, or tearing up asphalt, or putting in different stanchions and bollards and these charging pads. You might be able to do that up front, get some experience with these chargers and with charging your school bus under managed charging, and then you would be better informed on what you want to do in the future. And then then that goes along with the determining the power requirements, and then considering your disaster response and resiliency options. Is your school, your facility used in a disaster? What does that look like? Is it only the gymnasium? Is it the cafeteria? Are there other rooms in that facility that are also used in that disaster response? Because when it comes down to doing this sort of thing and where the school buses might come and plug in, there's a lot of pre-work that needs to be done, which is actually isolating those loads, isolating that electricity need at the site, so that you're not pulling up and having to power the entire school. You're just wanting to power those specific classrooms or those specific facilities that might be used as the shelter environment. So we have this goal from the service request application, with the utility, to working charger. It should be under 12 months, which aligns with the order of the bus. So there's a lot of utility programs out there. This is more for information, that your utility may be able to help you out in more ways than you know. There are certain utilities that have make-ready programs already implemented or approved by their commissions and boards. And what does that make ready mean? Make ready means that the utility will come in and actually pay for some certain things that they don't pay for in other locations. So especially around electric transportation, they may be able to pay for line extensions or these transformer upgrades, these electrical upgrades that might otherwise be the burden of the customer. So for example, if you have a shopping mall that's going to go in, or a big store or a big business that goes in, a lot of times those stores, those malls, those sorts of things will be the payment for those new electrical connections all the way back to the main feeding line, which would be either on the distribution or transmission system, the main electrical utility line. All of those improvements often get paid for by the customer. In the case of electric vehicles, a lot of commissions and boards have realized that this is a cleaner form of transportation. It is helping us move from a fossil fuel and more carbon intensive environment to a less carbon intensive environment. And so they approve programs where the utility can step in and actually, pay for some of these things. Sometimes that's through the existing rate base. So if it is a rate-based capital project, meaning that it's paid for by all ratepayers in that area, or it's paid for by a tariff. A tariff is a little bit different than a rate-based program. Rate-based is all customers. A tariff is a specific customer, and that's where the utility will come in and they'll pay for these upgrades, and then the specific customer will repay for those improvements over a long period of time under a depreciation schedule. And so those costs actually do get paid for by the customer, but they're not required up front. So these are all the things that could be included in a make-ready program. And this is not even the full extensive list. And it's good to know if your utility has one. And how are you going to know? You need to ask. So it's really important when you engage your utility, that you ask these specific questions. And that's what the power planner is for. because it's not necessarily something that the utility is going to come to you with. They're not going to come and necessarily download all of this information and give you everything you need unless you know what you're asking for and know the right questions to ask. So what's successful in especially in this make ready area? Are you in a community that needs it the most? Do they come to you? Can you go to them? What would be the potential for that? And we're advocating or trying to get utilities to reach out and actually go to these communities that need them the most. What is the program successful? We have seen across the nation a lot of programs that sound really fantastic, but nobody uses them. They have all this money that's tied to them. They may have millions of dollars sitting there, able to be used in a particular program, but they have nobody subscribing to that program or taking advantage of it. So that, to me, that program is then not successful. There has to be a way to measure, the program success. Finding out from the utility the details that are involved in that program. Do you have to front the money in advance? Is that something that you can do? How would you go about doing that? A lot of educational facilities are extremely cash strapped. They don't necessarily have disposable budget. And then in addition to that, the budget process, is like in a lot of other public realms, is done 18 months in advance. So does that mean that you have to wait till the next funding cycle to be able to purchase the necessary infrastructure and equipment to charge these buses? Are there incentives? I talked about rebates and reimbursement and upfront funding. And does making sure that the installed equipment functions as it's supposed to, and then ongoing operations and maintenance. This one on the bottom is the one that everybody forgets about the most, but can be the most important, which is please do not forego regular maintenance on your equipment. If you install your charger and you don't have an annual maintenance program, that charger is going to fail. And then and think about it, if you are now using a charger instead of a gas pump to fuel your vehicle, and that charger goes out, it would be like your diesel pump goes out and the pump is broken and you can't get that fuel to your vehicle. In this environment, especially in this new environment where these chargers are mostly at the site and you don't have any availability to be able to go get the fuel somewhere else, it's really important that those chargers are maintained. And it's not necessarily a huge cost, but it can be, $500 to $800 a year for a level 2 charger. That needs to be budgeted in, and there needs to be a regular maintenance program with checklists that keep track of, the charger health and environment, and then also making sure that there's redundancy and spare parts that go along with that. So I would love to have you guys answer some questions if you have your smartphone or tablet, and you can go to mentimeter.com. That would be great. Billy, are there questions in the chat so far?
Apologies, I was on mute. We have a couple of questions, yes.
Okay, why don't I go ahead and answer those questions first, and then I can, I'm gonna stop sharing for the time being until I can get to that Mentimeter login.
Okay. First question is, does the power planner tell you where the environmental tipping point is? For example, if I'm in a state that has a power mix of 50% coal, when you take into account and expected schedules for having to update due to load growth, will the tool give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Okay, so you were kind of breaking in and out there. So the answer is not necessarily no. There are carbon and climate calculators that will determine depending on the electrical source, will determine your footprint. Basically, what we're finding across the board is that the efficiency in an electrical generation environment, as opposed to an individual vehicle environment, is that the electricity is generated much more efficiently. So vehicles can have a really low efficiency, somewhere around 20, maybe up to, if you're very lucky, up to 30% of the fuel that you're putting into that vehicle is actually being utilized to power the vehicle, and the rest is lost in heat and mostly through heat. In an electric charging environment, you can get upwards to around 60, 70% in through the utility, meaning that they might have heat recovery systems. They have additional ways to capture that heat in the generation environment that actually turns that heat, that waste heat into fuel again, into electricity. It's much, much, much more efficient. So if you ask, even if you're in a coal environment and your utility generator uses that coal, converting to electric school buses is still going to be more efficient and better for the environment than a diesel school bus of the same size and capacity. So I don't know if that answers your question, because you were kind of cutting in and out there, but it doesn't. These calculators will take that into account. Actually, the Department of Transportation does have calculators that looks at those specific fuel sources, and that Department of Transportation link is in the power planner. So you could go to the power planner and you could say, I get my electricity from a coal plant, and I'm going to be fueling my electric vehicle from a coal plant. It would be able to tell you, your carbon offset or your carbon footprint. Is it going to give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whether you should do it? Well, it's always a thumbs up across the board when it comes to whether you should have an individual diesel engine on the bus or whether you should have electric generation from your utility.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Our next question is, I believe it did. Our next question is, do colleges qualify for this program?
Do colleges qualify for the electric school bus program? No, so it is K to 12 in this particular environment. However, we also just got, I know that you have probably heard that, the Inflation Reduction Act it is also going to have a lot of additional money. So there are other funds that can be used for the beyond K to 12 environment in colleges and other places that are converting to electric bus fleets. There are other programs that are already existing. So there's DERA funding, for example, the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act funding. There's NEVI funding, which has also come out with some revisions. And these are federal funded programs, and in some cases there's state funded programs as well. So while this Clean School Bus program is for the K to 12 environment, specifically around school buses for that age group, there are other opportunities for conversion of these campus fleets as well.
Okay. And another question is, what are your thoughts about IRA or other incentives for EV buses or vans to serve as mobile storage for solar schools, vehicle to building during the summer and other times?
So I think it's a fantastic opportunity. So anytime that you can generate your own electricity on site to be able to fuel an electric vehicle fleet, that is the best you can possibly do, because you have a couple opportunities with that. One is obviously that's being done during the daytime. School buses are perfect in this environment. And the reason for that is because school buses, typically in the middle of the day, they're sitting there. They're once they run their morning route and then their afternoon routes, even if they do a tiered schedule where they're actually servicing several, let's say they pick up the high schoolers in the morning, the middle schoolers and elementary school, in a later schedule, even if they run several routes a day, typically in the middle of the day when that solar array is generating energy, that energy can be sent to those batteries and directly offset fossil fuel. Now, the energy arbitrage comes into it later, where you're actually moving that energy from one period to another. That when you are using that energy and you're offsetting that, what that does for you is a couple different things. That allows for you to be able to take energy that might be, it might be more expensive at different times, and you can actually move that energy to power. If you have bidirectional charging, you can move that energy to power your facility at that time when electricity rates might be the most expensive. The other thing too is sometimes there's things called demand charges, which is what the utility will add on to your bill. That they will add on to your bill when you increase your electrical use. So then that becomes an adder on the top, because what that does is that says to the utility, hey, you have this big increase in electricity, and now at one certain time of a particular day or during a particular month, and now we need to be prepared to meet that electric consumption at any time, because we don't know when you're going to do that. So what they'll do is they'll add a layer on top of your bill to meet that new demand. The issue with that is that then that can add a lot to an electrical bill. Sometimes that can increase your bill up to 30%. So what you can do with arranging renewable energy at your site and directly charging your batteries is you can stay away from those peak periods, which tend to align with like a 4 to say 10 p.m. time frame. In a lot of areas where people are coming home from work, or their electricity is very expensive, and typically those would be the times during which a bus would normally charge. The bus drivers come back from their afternoon routes, they plug in, and they're charging that bus during that peak period. That's when the utility actually provides the most expensive energy, because they're having to meet everybody's needs at the same time. Sometimes those peaks happen a couple times in a day. Sometimes your peak, if you are in Arizona or Las Vegas area or something like that, where you have huge air conditioning loads in the middle of the day, you could have a peak in the middle of the day where the utility charges you more to charge your bus in the middle of the day. Well, that also happens to be when school buses, or those particular school buses with those routes where they have a morning and afternoon route, they like to come back and plug in and charge. Well, if that happens to line up with your area's peak, say with these very large air conditioning loads, you're going to get charged more for that electricity from the utility at that time than at any other time. So if you have renewable energy that's being generated on site, that works perfectly with what, lining up with the school bus time frame.
Okay.
That was a long-winded answer. Sorry, but yeah, go ahead.
That's okay. So to accomplish decarbonization, you recommend a tool that schools can use to determine if a purchase of an electric bus would either decrease or increase their carbon use.
Yeah, so in every case, basically, if you are putting in or using an electric school bus as opposed to a diesel school bus, your carbon footprint is going to decrease because the energy generated from the utility or from renewable resources is going to be less than the diesel fuel that you're using to power that individual bus. It's just more efficient. But if you're looking for specific numbers, that's there, and this is to the tool that I spoke to before, especially on the Department of Energy and Transportation website, that is going to be able to better help you identify what that environment looks like. So if you're going from, currently diesel fuel to a coal-based utility generated fuel, it's going to give you that change in your carbon consumption. And there are several other tools that would do the same thing. Most of them include a carbon calculator. The other part of that, though, I don't know if this is part of the same question, but I did mention that one of the tools that we do have is a total cost of ownership tool, which is that has more to do with, not only this doesn't calculate the carbon so much as calculates your savings on fuel, because now you're buying electricity at a much more stable rate, but also in repairs and maintenance for that vehicle that doesn't take as much. So you're paying more upfront, and that goes into that total cost of ownership because your cost for the vehicle is higher. But over the period of time, your repairs and maintenance are much, much, much less because you don't have all the liquids and oils and that sort of thing that need to be changed. And in a lot of cases, even brakes are much less maintenance intensive than on a traditional bus, because you have regenerative braking that actually puts a lot of less wear and tear on the braking mechanism than in a traditional diesel bus.
Okay, well, thank you. The only other questions that we're getting is they're saying that the code is not working.
Oh, sorry. So I think, let's see if I can do this. So let me see if I can share my screen now, because I started it, and can you see? I'm going to see if I can move this up, because I'm supposed to be able to be sharing this. And hopefully this will work. I have to go to where I'm sharing my screen with you guys. You're getting to see all my stuff on my screen here. Can you see the Mentimeter code on the screen now? Am I sharing that part of my screen? Okay, you can.
Yeah, where it says increase, stayed the same, or decreased.
Yeah, so does that code now work for people? There we go, great. Okay.
And I just typed the code into the chat box for everyone.
Oh, great. Okay. But you can still see my screen where the results are coming up in real time.
Yes.
Okay, great. This is my first time doing this on my own from the Mentimeter. I usually have some staff helping out with this. So, all right, so let's move on to the next question. Besides yourself, who in your organization by position would also benefit from this information? So this is really important because I'm not exactly sure of the audience that I know that this is facility management, but is there somebody else that if you said, hey, I heard this today, or here's this tool and resource, are those transportation managers? Are those the mechanics that that might benefit? Is that somebody in your admin department? Is there somebody that you interface with that makes the decision that would benefit from that information? And this is a type in the answer. Business services, facility management, and fleet services. Okay. And we'll wait a couple more minutes. I know we're ending at the top of the hour here, so. State Department of Ed. Okay, so one of the things I do want to say, there was a feedback loop yesterday in a webinar with EPA around this Clean School Bus program funding, and they're one of the people on the call gave that that feedback around the State Department of Education, which is it's a federal program that's administered by EPA, and they said that that they thought that the EPA should do more outreach to actually state departments of education as opposed to their federal counterparts, and because that is really where a lot of those decisions are made. So I think I have one more question. Let me move on here. What additional equity considerations should we note that were not presented? So I said, the thing is stakeholder engagement. We were looking at, under-resourced school districts that might not even have the resources to apply for funding. They might not have the necessary staff to be able to do that. Are there things that, and this could be even for people who have their own children who are, have kids that ride school buses. Are there things that we should look at from an equity side that would be really helpful for us to know on the stakeholder engagement side, and then, just various issues that we should consider that we might not have thought about or that weren't mentioned in this presentation?
Greg, is this like a product that I could put a link into their follow-up email along with the code, and they could go in and answer these questions after the webinar?
Yeah, I can do that. I can leave the survey questions open, and so for those, okay. I think I can do it. I think I can do it for at least the next, maybe the rest of the day. I don't know if it'll accept. I think I have to be in presentation mode for them to do it, but I can do it for the next couple hours for sure.
All right. Well, I'll send a quick note out to everybody who attended with this information, and they can log on, and you'll probably get some more answers.
Okay. And then also, I just wanted to note that I definitely appreciate the time, and want to make sure I'm still in presentation mode. See if I can get back to my thank you slide here. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Okay, so here's my contact information. Again, I said that there's at wri.org, you can type in electric school bus initiative, or you can type in electric school bus. just because it's an electric school bus doesn't mean that the resources don't necessarily apply to other buses or other fleets. So there are a lot of resources on there that actually kind of cross over into their other areas. We've done a lot of studies, we've done a lot of interviews, we've put out a lot of articles around, some of the things that we're seeing across the nation in these environments, some of the, best practices, some of the challenges. Those are some interesting articles to read because, it helps to try to understand maybe what other school districts have gone through or other, people in this space that are trying to transition to these electric fleets are dealing with at the current moment. So with that, I think we're at the end of our presentation. So I have the one last slide.
All right. Well, thank you, Greg, for a very informative session. And there's a few people who would like to connect with you, and I will be sending you their names shortly after this ends. So thank you again for taking time and getting up so early in the morning to be with us today. So
No
to our attendees, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. So until next time, be safe, stay healthy, and be kind to one another. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye.